What's up guys, it's Steven. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I want to talk about a new series that I want to start, and that is showing and kind of analyzing scenes from movies that I love, that I constantly go back to and think about, and kind of break down why do I love these scenes and what are the specific aspects that make these scenes so great. First movie I want to talk about is Zodiac, David Fincher's Zodiac from 2007. One of his most underrated films, and I think it's definitely up there. At least for me, it's in my top 3 in terms of Fincher's films. I think it's one of the best detective mystery thrillers in the past 2 decades, and it's definitely worth a rewatch if you guys have not seen it yet. Fincher is great at making these cult classic thrillers. If you guys have not seen the movie Zodiac, it's a story about finding the Zodiac killer, and it also shows how well these detectives made calculations to try to get the killer, but also had some missteps. And it's all based off a book that came out in the 80s, I believe. But it has great performances all around. Robert Downey Jr., Jake Gyllenhaal, Mark Ruffalo. The whole cast is amazing in this movie. The cinematography is great. The editing specifically is really great. And the writing, of course, with great performances all around. Fincher is one of those meticulous directors that I love to watch, and he reminds me a lot of almost like a young Hitchcock in a lot of ways. Hitchcock was very meticulous with his shot selection and storyboards and such things like that. This video I will be including some spoilers, but we'll be mainly focusing on the scene itself and how well shot it is in terms of the storyboards, the selection of color, just breaking it down piece by piece in terms of the scene and the context of the movie as a whole. This is one of the most pivotal scenes in the movie, in my opinion, because it also comes to play towards the end of the movie. The first shot of this scene is an establishing wide shot of Rodeo, California. I feel like this is one of the scenes that has the most color that pops out throughout the movie, because we see these great yellows and navy blues and the yellows from the seats and then the green in the background. You get all these different colors and it feels very inviting into a scene that's going to have a lot of tension built into it. Shout out to the costume designers and the prop designers and the set decorators, obviously, because they made a great decision in introducing all these colors that are seen also obviously throughout the movie. We get a lot of great colors that make the scene very inviting, even though we're kind of in this damp kind of location that's very industrial. And we also get the red from the Coke machine, but also we get the red as Alan starts to come in the building. He's washing his hands with a red cloth, and you kind of can read into that even more as maybe a sign of maybe he's washing the blood off his hands. Now I want to talk about this sweeping POV shot that we get. It's kind of a wide shot of as Alan comes walking into the building and into the room that the 3 detectives are in. We're kind of barricaded from seeing the actual detectives. And this is a great shot because we see that it's obviously supposed to be like a symbolism of how the detectives feel kind of imprisoned in this situation because Lee is about to come in and he's potentially could be the killer. The next 2 shots are just pretty quick. They're a little bit tighter on the detectives and then obviously towards Lee. We kind of get now that the detectives are already starting to speak and they're kind of creeping in, and they just introduced that they're going to be interviewing Lee for a potential suspect. Now the next 2 shots I want to talk about is just a quick 2 shots. It's of the door being closed, and we also see the sign that says keep the door closed, and it's in red, obviously similar to the Coke and the cloth in Lee's hand, but also we get the sign that says be careful. Small details of the scene and kind of the setting that are placed to make the scene feel even more tense now, because obviously you get these cautionary warnings about what might happen in this room now that Lee's a potential suspect and he's with 3 detectives that are going to be questioning him. A quick note that when Lee sits down, it's kind of him against these 3 detectives. We see them kind of all surrounding him in different ways. Lee's kind of at the center of attention, and this is just making it all focused on him in this kind of wide shot. Now we get the first question directed toward Lee, and automatically we get a tighter cut. Now we're getting a little bit more personal and more into Lee's character and more into his space along with the detectives. As the conversation progresses, we're going to be getting some tighter shots involved, not just because of the dialogue, but also because of how tense the situation is. Something I wanted to point out is throughout this scene, we get this sense of distance between Lee and the detectives. Even as they're questioning him, we kind of get sometimes a little bit tighter, but we never get so close so it feels like an extreme close-up. But even through these subtle type of shot changes, we kind of get more into the details of what makes Lee Lee. And obviously, could he be potentially the killer that they're looking for? Next shot I want to talk about is when Lee crosses his leg and the detective looks and notices something. It's reference to like the previous scenes of the detectives noticing that other people have called the potential suspect possibly homosexual. Kind of a sense of how the detectives are always looking and kind of detailing everything that Lee does in this entire conversation. When Lee corrects the detective of changing his name from Arthur to Lee, we get a quick what? And that's just a great cut, because we see now that the detective is hanging on every word that Lee says, and changing his name to Lee is just a slight hint that he might possibly be the killer, because the killer was suspected to be changing identities throughout the story. When we get Lee's depiction of what happened that night and his alibi is mentioned, we kind of get the sense that Lee just feels so comfortable in the situation that he's in right now that he doesn't feel like he's even a threat. Because as we see like these quick shots of just Mark Ruffalo looking around at the room, kind of like we don't even have to say anything, this guy's just giving up his information so easily. It's kind of a sign that he potentially might not be the killer, but it's also just showing kind of who's in control of the room at the moment, and it's Lee. And it could also be a sign that maybe Lee being in control of the room and kind of being obviously this kind of bigger menacing character could potentially be the killer as well. We also get this kind of a detective trick as seen in I'm guessing Fincher probably saw this in like regular interviews or something like that, but in these interviews we see how the detectives are not speaking, and then once we get the reveal that he had like these knives, and the detective says, what? Like, you had these knives that are covered in blood? It's kind of just showing how the detectives were always listening to everything that Lee is saying, and he might be on edge at all times. Lee is willfully giving up this information without even a constant question. It's kind of just left to him to give up any information that he wants to make himself seem innocent, even though he might be innocent in the course of the whole movie. I love it when Fincher does these classic inserts of characters' faces or just maybe a slight detail of the character himself. And we get these 3 shots of the detectives as they continue to kind of watch and monitor every inch of Lee's movements in the comments about touching the students. And it's just a great shot and a great moment, because we see Arthur Lee's kind of almost cracking under pressure, or even more so, he's kind of noticing that the detectives are getting to him, and they're kind of, now he's witnessing what's actually happening here, and he's seeing that they are making him like a main suspect. Use of the singles, we're getting each reaction of the detectives as this question is asked, and then we get Lee's adverse reaction and his response of him not being the Zodiac killer. And it's kind of his stance and his firm stance of him denying any form of suspicion of it being him. I love Mark Ruffalo's subtle acting when he's asking about the watch and if he could see, and he asks a second time. It's probably in the script, but he asks a second time, can I see it? And he makes it a point to actually physically see the watch. And obviously we see that this watch has the sign of the Zodiac, and it's another point towards maybe they're headed in the right direction and Lee could be possibly the suspect, or maybe he's just a red herring in the entire story. Something that I noticed upon rewatching this scene, and it's such a great decision to make, is the lack of music. A lot of the noises that we hear throughout the scene is diegetic and it's just from the world itself. We get these subtle sound effects throughout the scene, and towards the end of it we get this loud this buzzer of when the scene is almost coming to a close. I love this below angle wide shot that we get as Lee gets back his watch, and we see the 3 detectives now looking up at Lee, and we see how big he is in terms of his size, and it's a very intimidating way to show Lee amongst the 3 detectives, and it kind of makes us feel as the audience that anything can happen with this guy. He could be the killer, but he could be just a big guy. We just have to wait and see throughout the movie. The last shot of this scene is the barricaded wall kind of between Lee and the detectives from the room. And it's again the separation between the detectives and Lee, and also it kind of leaves how the detective could be feeling like the prisoners themselves, kind of locked between all 3 and wondering if Lee is potentially the actual suspect. Little shadows in terms of all the faces of the detectives, including Lee himself, and it's kind of meant to show that he's still innocent, and this is just a regular checkup on kind of a possible suspect. The subtext of the scene is that this is a very tense, heavy scene with this interrogation. Another notion with the lighting that I think helps with this scene is that the idea of hiding in plain sight, and kind of I think this is one of the big messages of the movie and the scene itself, is that the suspect could have been anybody, could have been your next door neighbor or something. It could be someone that's just hiding in plain sight. And this is kind of what Arthur Lee Allen is kind of depicting in this scene. Allen is someone that has all of the quintessential things that you would want to find in the suspect of the Zodiac killer. He has the watch, he has the size, he has certain things about him. Maybe his mannerisms could potentially be similar to what they were looking for. His identity switch from Arthur to Lee. These are all things that could potentially lead them down the road of him being the main suspect. But as we see throughout the movie, they're constantly searching for the actual right guy. And it just shows how great of a scene as this is really just a moment of how the relationship between potential suspects and detectives are. So guys, that was my breakdown of this great Zodiac scene. Go watch the movie. Go watch the movie if you guys haven't already. It's one of my favorite from Fincher's. This is my third favorite Fincher film, actually. I have probably Fight Club and Social Network just ahead. But it's still one of the best films in the past 2 decades, I think. And one of the best thrillers, I think possibly of all time. And I constantly love to rewatch it because there's always this feeling of suspense and towards the ending and everything. It's just a great movie. Guys, like, comment, and subscribe if you guys want me to continue doing a series like this. I probably will. I love movies. They're my main focus for me personally. And being an inspiring filmmaker, doing these kind of breakdowns kind of helped me learn better my skills as a filmmaker, and kind of also noticing these small little details in the films that I love. Like, comment, and subscribe to this video, and leave down any more recommendations for anything in the future. Have a good one.